Today on Drawbli,
I am drawing smaller for bigger results.
Hey, I'm Ben.
And I'm Abby.
And we are self-taught artists documenting our drawing adventures because art is better when shared with friends.
So click that subscribe button if you're new around here.
And check out our guidebook on drawing, link down below. Abby, you are drawing smaller for bigger results. Tell me about that.
So this is to continue on with my week's focus on creating art using only one hue. And I had successfully gone about this with two portraits of two faces earlier in the week.
And they were very good.
Thank you. So I wanted to see if I could expand that to a more full body image. However, I found pretty quickly that I felt very limited, of course, by the size of my canvas, which has happened to me sometimes with the iPad before, where when you're zoomed in, you can't get a grasp for the whole image as a whole, but when you're zoomed out, you're working on such like a tiny scale that you feel like you can't create like the marks and sketch it with any kind of precision or accuracy.
Gotcha.
So what I ended up doing to try to find a compromise was I gradually shrunk the art and shrunk the art. I focused initially, I have the head here very large, and I
just kept making it smaller and smaller.
Exactly. I drew and made it smaller and then drew and made it smaller. I figured, once I got to the legs, those aren't as much of a focal point. So if I draw those really zoomed out, it's not as detrimental as if I were to do that with the face and hair.
A lot of artists recommend drawing smaller to focus on what's important, that first read.
That's very true.
Do you think that drawing smaller helped you with that?
I don't know if that was super applicable to me to this particular piece. I mean, there's just some nuanced shading between her face and her hair. I can identify like a large dark piece at the back of her head on the back of her braid, but a lot of her face, except for near her ear, is kind of all very bright and light. So it's very subtle shade shifts. So instead of being able to put in like big blocks of shadow, it didn't feel like I had distinct areas, of light and dark. So that's why I was okay with starting and just trying to get these nuanced value shifts from a large perspective.
So now that you've done this once, would you try doing this again?
I don't know if it was my favorite way to work. I've actually tried this in the past where I've had a piece and it's a little bit bigger. And it usually is about this amount where I've got the head going down to about the mid-thigh on a person. And that almost seems to sometimes be my limit for somebody who's like fully clothed, maybe even has a subtle, like a little bit of an environment. In this case, let's say holding a cat. And at this size of working.
A cat environment.
I think for me, things get pretty clustered very quickly, where there's a lot of detail that I don't yet have the skill to fully simplify. Somebody else might have just drawn a very basic outline of her braid and maybe hinted at some value shifts there, which is maybe what I should have done. Although I think I was also still somewhat in the mindset of hair studies, which is how I started this particular journey. So I really wanted to see if I could add more detail and interest to her hair and have it be a little more accurate.
Do you think that you are someone that is focused on creating details in your drawings?
Yeah, I think that's also something that I have enjoyed working on to date. I like, and we all like, I feel like, expressions, and I like hair, and I think details are a fun thing. So has always been hard for me to step back and just focus on the big fundamentals, which is why these value studies are helpful to me, to just step back and focus on areas of light and shadow. But I still do like to get caught up in the details because that's fun.
Something that might be a really interesting and probably difficult practice would be to use one brush size the entire time you're working on something, like a large brush size, and you have to carve out a value study with that large brush.
Have you tried that?
I've done similar things with large brush strokes, and so have you in our Alla Prima studies when we were going through Ahmed Al-Dori's Meds Map course. I think that it is very helpful to like think in that manner of big shapes. Obviously, it's a lot easier when you can change your brush size, but I think being in that headspace is typically a good spot to be when we're talking about painting and capturing values.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah, being in that headspace of getting the very basic forms in first and then going back and adding detail, as opposed to my more laserjet printer style of
Everybody
going
has
from
their
the top
own
down.
style of working. Like if I were you, for instance, I would handle this in a completely different way. Like if I was working on this piece, I think if we had like a side-by-side time lapse, and we've done this before, we're working on like the same piece, I am definitely someone that like likes to make little marks of where everything will live and be, and then I'll go work on those things like just a little bit at a time. But you definitely work in more of, like you said, a laserjet printer style, and I think both ways are totally fine. I have seen people work my way and be successful, and I've seen people work your way and be very successful as well.
It's interesting how people seem to maybe gravitate towards one or the other from long habit. I would like to, though, practice both ways because I feel like both have a lot to offer, and it would probably be better as well, I feel like, to practice going from that fundamental stage to a more refined piece, because I think you have to have a better understanding of like light and shadow as a whole to look at something and say, well, my highlights will live there and my shadows will live there, and already be planning, well, my midtones will eventually live here and here.
That's very true.
Because when you laserjet printer this, it's easy to get like tunnel vision on one spot and say, well, this spot is very dark, and so I will make this the darkest spot. And then you're zoomed in on another spot and you say, and this spot is very dark, and I will make this as dark as possible. And then you zoom out and you realize one of those was actually much darker than the other. Let's say this cat is much darker.
You lose sense of the whole by
Exactly.
working on the individual parts.
And that's a challenge too of working like zoomed in, and that's where I am personally struggling with this size of a portrait, I guess, where I feel like I have to zoom in to work on parts, but then I really lose track of the thing as a whole.
What you could maybe try doing, and I have found this very helpful myself, is to take your image on the left and just draw the like box for the border of the image, and then draw within that bordered box and just say like, this is where my drawing lives in this bordered box, and I have the scale and proportion exactly the same as the image on the left. I've found that to be really helpful to also help work on proportions, to like put things in the correct rough spot.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. I also don't think I really flipped this at all. So my proportions, for all I know, were really, really off. It's hard to tell unless you actually take the time to flip something.
No, I don't think your proportions are like far enough off that it's, you know, egregious or anything. I think it actually looks really great.
Thank you. It was fun to work on.
In general, the only reason why I flip my canvas is because my eyes are like sideways or something, and when I flip my canvas, the face is like wah, like twisted up in some form or fashion. It's really just caused by you working on something from scratch and getting used to the way something looks, and you kind of, your brain like automates it essentially. You're like, you don't need to look at this anymore, don't worry about it, we'll focus over here now. And then you flip the canvas and it refreshes everything.
And if you want to refresh everything, click that subscribe button and check out the link below to our guidebook, How to Easily Draw Every Day.
And share your work on Instagram with hashtag Drawbli, because art is better when shared with friends.
And this is the part where we say goodbye.
Goomba. I love the way you handled this drawing. It's super cool. I loved the skirt with all the fun texture. The cat was cute and fun. The hair looked amazing. Excellent job.
Thank you. I could say the same about you. Your hair looks amazing.